this is really exciting because part of trout fishing and catching big fish and catching lots of fish all have to do with the jig. And jigs are pretty important, and there's lots of colors. And of course there's, besides colors, ginger. They're called really cool names too.
Yeah.
Why not come to Lilleys Landing and find out about Lilleys Landing's jigs? How's this? And this is the creator, the molder, the shaper, the tire, the painter. He does everything with them, and he even catches fish. Duane, tell him who you are.
I'm Duane Doty from Lilleys Landing Resort and Marina. I'm a guide out here also. I own my own guide business called Ozark Trout Runners. And we've got some jigs to play with today.
Yeah, and tell them about these jigs, because there was a demand for jigs, and you've come up with a jig that is a high quality jig.
Yeah, you know, at the resort we sell quite a few jigs each year. We have some winter tournaments where jigs are in high demand. Yeah, that's a real fun one called Sculpin color.
Sculpin?
It's brown olive. But we have a high demand for jigs at the resort, especially in the wintertime with some of our tournaments, and we were having trouble with our jig provider, keeping up with demand, and that would leave us with people wanting jigs but no jigs to buy.
Right.
So to kind of make up for that demand, Phil, the owner of Lilleys Landing Resort and Marina, asked if we thought we could come up with our own jig head and maybe put that in production. A lot of thought, a lot of design went into these jig heads.
Right.
I had always tied a lot of jigs on other manufacturers' jig heads, and there were certain things I didn't like about them. For instance, a collar. A collar is what is directly behind the jig head that you actually tie your feathers to.
Right.
It's basically just a straight cylinder, like a soda can cylinder. And when you would try and attach feathers to that, when you get your line tight and packed up against your jig head would naturally push everything away. So then you got to make more wraps. You get a great big collar, and not everything would all adhere like you would want it to. So when I designed this jig head, I actually designed a tapered collar. It starts fat down by the point of the hook, and it tapers towards the jig head. And then there's a little tying ring incorporated in there, and indention all the way around. That actually holds your thread and locks everything into place. So now instead of 50, 60, or 100 wraps to get all your feathers to hang on there, it takes about 12 to 15 wraps. A real nice tight collar of about a 1/16 of an inch. Keeps everything locked in place. Now, when you're fishing this jig, and you might get down on the bottom and get some moss on it, everybody typically likes to flip that jig in the water, try to knock that moss off because they don't want to bring it up and clean it up. On those old jigs, we'd lose all them feathers a lot of times when that happened. That doesn't really happen with the jig. Everything's kind of locked in place, and very seldomly happens. The other thing we incorporated into this jig head was an offset sides. One side is 20% larger than the other side. And what that does is when you cast that jig out into the water and let it sink on a free line, slack line, it causes it to corkscrew down in the water and then kind of flip out on the tail end of that drop. It gives it a little more action. So it's kind of a fun concept to play with there. So we have started from the beginning of designing this jig head in some CAD software. We've got a woodworking CNC machine in the shop. I pushed it to its ultimate limits and had it machining metal to come up with these. Created a single mold, had to calculate in the shrinkage process for when you send it out to a spin casting machine, and their silicone mold, you lose 12 to 15% of your volume. So the final product we got back was a very accurate weight of, like, example, 1/32 or a 1/16 ounce or a 3/32 or an 1/8 ounce. Our 1/8 ounce jigs weigh right about an 1/8 ounce, maybe 5 1/1000ths variance, but not much. Our 1/32 ounce weigh 1/32 of an ounce, pretty much spot on those. So the problem is when you're talking to a jig fisherman, they've always fished with the fish rising right there. They've always fished with the previous manufacturer's jigs where they didn't calculate in that shrinkage. So when they sold you a 1/16 ounce jig and told you it was a 1/16 ounce, it really only weighed less than a 1/32 of an ounce. And so when you talk to people now and say, hey, you need to fish our new 1/32 ounce jig, they automatically, there's no way I can cast that. Well, yeah, you can, because it's a true 1/32 and actually cast heavier than the competitors' 16th ounce jig. So kind of been lied to your whole life, and we're trying to bring that out. When we want an 1/8 ounce jig, we want one that weighs an 1/8 ounce.
Right. And so what sizes do your jigs come in?
They come in 1/32, 1/16, 3/32, and 1/8 ounce, and that's for all the different water flows that you could have on this lake, on Lake Taneycomo in Branson, Missouri. Like the 1/8 ounce is pretty much strictly for 4 units and 4 units with floodgates. You can get down on the bottom, which is where you need to be jig fishing during those kind of flows with our 1/8 ounce jig. Typically, when the water's off to maybe a half unit, I'll throw the 1/32 ounce, and then you just got the variations between 2 units. You're at 16, 3 units, you're at 3/32.
Depending on the depth, that's how people should pick their
depth and flow. Flow is probably the more key than the depth. Depth you can obtain by time. With flow, you can't overdo it without weight.
Okay. And so you have a lot of great colors here, and of course...
and we sell these all at Lilleys Landing Resort and Marina now.
So tell them a couple of these colors.
Some of our mainstays that traditionally we've always found work are our favorite are the sculpin and gingers and sculpin and peach with either brown heads or orange heads. I don't have any orange-headed ones in here. Straight up sculpin. Those are some mainstays. Wintertime fishing, you start getting into the whites and grays. Another new one we've been trying out is sculpin and white.
Sculpin and white, why not?
That has been catching some fish too. Also, you've got our black and olives are good ones, straight up black. And this is kind of an experimental one, black and purple.
You would think it works,
I'm thinking white bass range kind of here stuff, you know. Fly fish for the white bass with black and purples. Well, let's try it with some trout and see what happens.
That's cool. So they have, these are stocked and kept at
They are,
Lilleys Landing,
in the fly shop in
fly
there.
shop. And the fly shop is open when?
7 days a week, this time of year from 7 a.m. till 6 p.m. And then we have summertime hours that are expanded just a little bit.